McQueen. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me.
Definitely, my pleasure.
Awesome. Where are you coming to us from right now?
I am at home right now. I'm in Austin, Texas.
Nice. You've always been from Austin, right? You grew up there?
I grew up here and then after high school went up to Denton to go to North Texas and stuck around a few years after that for to get, involved in the Dallas music scene a bunch and then moved back here in 2010. So I've been here ever since.
That's awesome. I was reading about Austin, and because I like to look up, well, especially when I interview people, I like to look up like the local foods because I love food and I love going places and trying new stuff. And I was hearing mostly that it's like known for it's Tex-Mex in places like Cisco's and Joe's Bakery. And I wanted to know, are there any places that are kind of underground that you would really only know about if you grew up there and were a native of Austin?
I mean, there's a ton of like just little taco stands.
Mm-hmm.
The places that I really like, they're not, I mean, I found them more recently, not when I was growing up, but there's a place called Veracruz
Mm-hmm.
that's super awesome. There's a place called the Tamale House in East Austin, and that place is amazing. And yeah, those are the first ones that come to mind. There's a place called Taco Deli that's more like bougie tacos. Uh, there's sort of like those two categories. There's like the street taco, and then there's the bougie taco, and there's good versions of both, and
Yeah.
then questionable versions of both, of course. But yeah,
Yeah, see, I'm out in Brooklyn, and really the few places that are near me for like any type of Mexican food, there's like a couple really genuine places, but then there's like the bougie places where it's like six or $7 for a taco, and I'm just
yeah,
like, I cannot afford that. There are a couple good places though, like especially in Manhattan. That's where if funny enough, like in New York City, ironically, you usually think of going to Manhattan where everything's really expensive, but there's something about like Mexican food that you can find the cheapest Mexican food in New York City in Manhattan, and it's also the best, to be honest.
yeah. I know it's like one of the few things that that you can't really find, even though you can find almost anything in New York. It seems to be the case. Like we just did some Fork shows down here, and our keyboard player Henry is from New York, and
Hmm.
we basically ate Mexican food like every single day that we were in Texas
Uh-huh.
because it just, you can't get it up there. So we took advantage as much as possible.
Yeah, it's a shame because I can't really cook Mexican food very well. My roommate's Mexican, so he can make like some pretty damn good food, but I can't really do it myself.
You can learn. Come
Yeah,
on.
I can learn. I can cook Italian food. That's my thing. I can cook Italian food really well. Unfortunately, New York City has fantastic Italian food, so it's not much of an anomaly or a skill to be able to cook it here.
Well, cooking anything is good. It's
That's
great.
true. Yeah, you've been doing. I saw on your YouTube channel you're doing these. You've done 2 episodes so far of you baking and then
Yeah.
doing something music related. When'd you
Yes.
start? When'd you start doing that?
So I basically, when pandemic happened, I had already been wanting to do some YouTube videos, some teaching stuff, and my initial thought was to just do kind of like super quick, like just make it up as I go kind of videos. Like here's some stuff to learn, like just casual sorts of teaching videos, and then the more I started to work on it, my perfectionism kind of kicked in, and it was like, okay, well, I want it to be good. I don't want it to just be me rambling. So I eventually started to script it out and make more of a specific way of doing, like, I'm going to break this lesson down into like very specific things, teach in a really clear way, and then also do like visuals on the screen. So the end result of that was that the videos take a very long time to make. But fortunately, the silver lining with the pandemic and not being able to tour is that I've had a lot of time at home. So basically just decided to take that time and make the channel a real thing. So I've got like 9, I think, videos in a series that are specifically about teaching rhythm,
Hmm.
uh, kind of for rhythm guitar, but also just like the broad concepts of rhythm and call and response and stuff like that. And a lot of that is based on what I learned from one of my mentors when I was in Dallas, or in Denton, but hanging out in Dallas a lot. This keyboard player named Bernard Wright.
Hmm.
So a lot of that was kind of based on what he taught me, but then also kind of combining it with real world experience and trying to just kind of lay it out for us, kind of specifically for people coming from where I was coming from, which is like an academic-ish jazz background.
Yeah.
Um, Trying to keep it universal also. But yeah, and then at the same time, I watch a lot of different YouTube videos and I like a lot of different things, and my wife does too. And so at some point she suggested that I like do some cooking things and combine it with music. I don't really remember how that idea got started because it seems sort of bizarre, but I don't know. So far we've done two of them and it turned out pretty good. So
Have you always been like interested in cooking your whole life?
I mean, a little bit, not like not a whole lot. I've definitely learned a lot from my wife because she comes from much more of like a foodie family. So
Yeah.
that was, yeah, very helpful. But also, honestly, like YouTube, like just following people on YouTube, you learn a lot more than I ever would have known otherwise.
Yeah. When you do these videos, are you the kind of person that goes through and writes like, basic bullet points, or do you script everything out, word by word?
It's a little of both. I found that the more that I script, the better that it turns out, and the faster the process is. Because what ends up happening is if you don't script it out, then you spend like an hour trying to figure out the best way to say something, and then you've got all this footage you've got to edit through. You forget, like, did I say that at the beginning or the end? What was the good version of that? And that it's such a headache. It feels so at first. I mean, it definitely feels a little stilted to have a script, but I feel like it's kind of like in a way, like an analogy we could make to reading music, where you're like, yeah, you're reading the notes, but you're also putting your energy and your spontaneity into the performance at the same time. So, even though you know what you're going to say, you're trying to still kind of perform as if you were thinking of it in that moment. And that seems to work pretty well. And then, of course, like going off script is totally fine. I mean, it depends on the video too, because for the cooking ones, there's pretty much not a script at all because I'm
Yeah.
just making the thing and usually just fucking up constantly. So that's where the fun stuff happens.
Yeah, see, I had this. I think it was summer. Yeah, it was summer of last year. So it was like, a couple months into the pandemic, everything's locked down. I was at my parents' house upstate for a while, and then I came back to the city, and I was just like, I need something to do. So I started making YouTube videos, and I at the time was in music school. I just graduated, and so I was like, I'll do some like music related videos. I had done it before, and I started doing it by just doing bullet points, and then again, I found that thing where it'd be like I'd shoot a 6 minute long video and I'd be there for 45 minutes of it just going like, maybe I shouldn't do that. So I ended up
Right.
having to do it where I would script out every single word. And
Mm,
I found there's such a skill that I didn't have. I don't even know if I have it now, of being able to deliver something that you're reading word for word exactly how it is and deliver it like it's coming off the top of your head.
right.
And that is something that once I made, my goal was to make like I think 10 videos in I think 2.5 months was like my goal, maybe 3 months, something like that. It was roughly over the summer, and I was like, damn, I give credit to freaking actors because they can say this shit and it sounds great, and I can barely come up with an idea and have it sound decent, you know?
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's part of the weirdness too is, if you're a musician, like especially a jazz musician, I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on like, some version of authenticity where it's like if you play a solo that you wrote out ahead of time, it's kind of like jive. Like, why? Don't do that. It's not cool. Improvise in the moment. But I think it is a little more complicated than that. Like even listening back to some of the greats and realizing like how some things, even in some great jazz solos, some things are planned out. You listen to alternate takes and there's some moments that are very similar. It just depends on, the artist and what they were doing at that time. And I mean, and apparently Jaco Pastorius wrote out all of his solos and those sound great. So
Oh, wait, really? I didn't know that.
that's what people have said. I've heard it now verified a couple times from different people. I haven't done like the research or anything, so take it for what it's worth. But yeah, that's what people say. He wrote all of his solos. He wrote out even all of his like lines and things that he would play.
Hmm.
And someone was saying, our bass player in Forq, Kevin Scott, he was saying he thought it was more like he would have like a handful of different solos that he might play, but it was still like a totally different take on improvising than we're sort of taught. I guess you're like, no, you must be coming up with every single moment in the moment.
Yeah.
Which I mean, that being said, that's what I try to do. I don't plan out any of my stuff, but I think that it's worth thinking about in terms of like the similarities between trying to act and say something, perform something, in a certain context. It doesn't necessarily have to be completely off the top of the head all the time.
And if it's
It's
not, it
just,
doesn't mean it's disingenuous either, you know?
yeah, it doesn't mean that you don't mean it and that you can't bring that kind of energy to it.
Did you ever hear about how they used to do Eddie Van Halen solos?
No.
See, my good buddy Sean, who by the way is a huge Chris McQueen fan, like he knows all your solos from like all the Snarky Puppy records. Even
Oh,
one of my best friends does since I was little, and he I forgot where he heard it from, documentary or book or something. But Eddie Van Halen back, I guess it would have been like late '70s, early '80s. They would record like a ton of takes of him soloing, purely improvised. It wasn't planned out. He would solo, and then they had this guy who had a like a mixing surface, whatever, a board, and he would play them all simultaneously, and they would like mark out the good spots of all of them, and then it was this matter of like chopping them up in the tape. And I think they did it early on, like '84 is when they started using computers for recording, I think. And he would do it live, so he would mark out where he had to mix things in, and then he would record a session of him mixing in this part and then quickly flicking the fader and then putting in this other part, and it was performed live, taking all of these takes and then recording them. And ever since I heard that, if you go back and listen to Eddie Van Halen solos, you listen to him and you go, this sounds so perfect. It sound like everything is incredible, and apparently this engineer is a huge part of that, and I think that's one of the craziest things ever.
it's the original Franken solo.
Exactly, you piece it together, and I mean now you can do it in Pro Tools easy as hell.
Right. I mean, that's programmed right into it to comp together a solo. I mean, that's basically industry standard at this point. Like, I don't know, I guess like probably like modern jazz, like super actual jazz people, Brad Meldau or whatever. Like I imagine they're not comping together solos. They're probably just doing takes and playing really well. But yeah, I mean, like it's very common in the world of music, in pretty much any genre to like just get the best version of everything because what you're doing is making a record. You're not trying to necessarily represent, you know, a real live performance. That's what real live performances are for.
Yeah. How old were you when you first started playing guitar?
I was 10-ish,
Okay.
somewhere there. Yeah. Yeah, I started playing uh, basically just because I thought bands were cool and I wanted to play guitar. And I had a friend who also wanted to play, but ended up just, it was one of those things where he like didn't really put any effort into it. So I was like, yeah, let's be in a band. But then I had no idea what that even meant at that time. So then just sort of started recording some stuff at home. I got a 4-track recorder at some point, like after a year or so, and started recording songs and making stuff up, sort of self-taught for a little bit.
Was there any
Uh,
specific guitarist that you were trying to emulate?
Not really a guitar. I was at that point definitely more interested in like songwriting and singing and stuff like that. Because I was mainly into like Nirvana, and I was really into Weezer and Radiohead. So like not like the most guitar-y guitar stuff, like not a whole lot of ripping solos or anything.
It's more
Um,
rhythmic stuff.
yeah, yeah, and just like emotional, like what does the song feel like, and layers, like layering on stuff. I think I was super into that.
That's an incredibly important part of music that I think a lot of people, especially when they're starting out, I mean, I do it all the time. You think more about the technicality of what you're doing and not how it's affecting the song. And that's something that, a lot of people say that like play to the song, but not a lot of people do. And I was talking maybe a week and a half ago with Liberty DeVito from Billy Joel's band, the drummer, and he was saying how the reason he got hired, he thinks really, is because he he listened to the lyrics before he listened to really anything else, and he would try the best way to kind of accentuate the point of the song. And I think that's such an interesting way to look at it. And he said that one time he went to Billy Joel and he goes, "Hey Billy, I think I'm going to take some lessons." And Billy said, "No, you'd no lessons," because he was worried that it would ruin that like spark of having that thing where there's that kind of blissful ignorance where you don't know exactly what you're doing, but in doing so, you make something new and possibly better than someone who's the most educated.
Right, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that there's sort of a tension between those things, and hopefully it's possible to do both. Like, I feel like the greats tend to do both really well. Like when I think about Herbie Hancock, I don't think there's any lack of playing to the song or emotion, but at the same time, I feel like you can probably play just about any change that any musician could try to play.
Hmm.
So, I think it's possible to do both, but I definitely have experienced that like sometimes there's a conflict there. Like when I after a few years of playing on my own, I started to play in this band called Redheaded Stepchild.
Yeah.
That was like kind of a kid band that came out of this like rock camp
Hmm.
um, back
That
in the
was
day.
with
It's called
Will Knack, right?
yeah. Yeah, it was called Natural Ear Music Camp, and it was like one of the first rock camps before that was like a big thing everywhere. And the first time that I ever played music with other people, so super helpful for me to learn how to do that. And and then like kind of in the course of being in that band, I started to take like jazz lessons because there was a jazz band at my high school that I wanted to join eventually. And I remember that our manager was like hated jazz, which like don't learn that. Like and I kind of understand in a way because I remember like trying to just throw in some like triplets and stuff or whatever into my solos. And I know that it sounded terrible. Just like you just stick to the blues until you've done like a good amount of studying and practicing. But there is that awkward period where you're like trying to do something and it just sounds very overly academic.
You got to do it though. There has to be one point, and fortunately, like I think, well, your people are fortunate if they do that when they're young. When they're like in middle and high school and they get through that period, because you kind of have to do that thing where you're just throwing shit at the wall and being like, "Oh, I heard this lick someone did and it sounded good, so now I'm gonna throw it into freaking Purple Haze for no reason." But it's one of those things where it's like shitty situation that kind of has to happen.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I do wish, in retrospect, that I wish that the way that jazz was taught was a little more down to earth and a little more I've heard Charlie Hunter talk about it being like language. So
Hmm.
as opposed to learning scales, like learning language, which makes sense because it's like all of this stuff goes back to like, I mean, if you want to go all the way back, it goes back to Africa, where like people literally use instruments to like say things. So that really is like the foundation of all this stuff. Is like when you play a lick, you're like kind of saying something. When you just run a scale and hit certain notes, you're not really saying something in the same way. Like
Hmm.
it might, it could sound nice. It's definitely possible for it to sound really cool, but without like a rhythmic impulse or like some accents or some phrasing, it really doesn't have anything in the realm of language. So I wish that had been a little more the way that I was taught all throughout like my jazz education, because it's very much oriented on like, okay, let's look at this chord and here's the scale that you play over this chord, which is not like doesn't really give you much to go on, and then you're just sort of a person playing scales over chords for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of my experience when I was, because I played drums, and when I was in high school, I had that kind of thing where it was like very much not even from teachers really. It was just from seeing people play. It was a lot of that attitude of listen to this person, play what this person does, which I think, like I said, is very important at one point. But no one ever. It took a while for people to tell me, how to take that information and then build upon it. It's like building the
Mhm.
foundation of a house. You can't just build the foundation and then just say, fuck it, I'm leaving. And that was something I learned just moving to New York City was where I learned that, and watching people and be like, oh, I think this guy is inspired by this person, but he sounds totally different.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess that is like definitely a thing that I'm still trying to figure out how to convey to students is like, because I have students that will transcribe a lot, and I remember transcribing a lot, and there's still like it just is really hard to take that and put it into your playing. I don't
Hmm.
know why that is. Like I don't know what the solution is. Probably it just takes a long time. There's really no
Yeah.
shortcut for that. You just have to transcribe a lot and and play in front of people for a long time, and eventually things start to make more sense. But yeah, I don't know. It's very difficult, but I do think the transcribing is like super important and probably the most helpful thing other than learning directly from your mentor in real life. I think transcribing is the next best thing.
Hmm. And so, wait, when you were young and you were in Redheaded Stepchild, from the band camp, were your parents at all like, yeah, this is fun, but this is not going to be your career? Or were they full on 100%?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for better or for worse, my parents have always just been like super supportive. I mean, that's definitely for better in
Hmm.
general, but it is a little bit like I'm surprised in retrospect that they didn't have some concerns about just like putting all of my eggs in that basket.
Yeah.
But I mean, fortunately for me, they were. I think the thing was that I was always a really good student. Like I sort of like would would be a perfectionist and try to get like all A's and like never mess up and be super good at school. So I think that that laid the foundation of like he's a good kid.
Hmm.
Whatever he's doing, he's earned it or something like that. So yeah, they were always super supportive. They drove me to all the rehearsals and gigs and were excited for me. And when I went to jazz school, they were totally fine with it.
Yeah.
So,
My parents were the same way. They just I think wanted me to get to a big city. That was the main thing. I think as long as I did that, they were happy with it because I think if I didn't have any plans to kind of leave because I grew up in Central New York. If I didn't do that, I think that would have been an issue, and I probably would have ended up at some form of trade school or something. Um,
mhm.
but so your parents are very supportive. And did you have any brothers or sisters?
Yeah, I have an older sister.
Okay, what did she think about the whole situation? Was she would say basically on the same page as your parents?
Yeah, I think pretty much the same page. Wait, there's sort of a running joke that she and I had like never fought our whole lives, which is not completely true, but it's like very weirdly close to true. So I don't know. She's very easy to get along with and supportive, and yeah, she's never been anything but like excited for all the stuff I've been doing.
Yeah. Being such a perfectionist, especially when you're younger, trying to get all those A's, were you miserable because you're just constantly trying to be, get an A in every single class? Or was the fact that you were getting an A kind of outweigh that amount of work and you were just so satisfied with it that you were fine with just kind of, were you stressed all the time about it?
Yeah, I don't know. I definitely didn't get enough sleep. Like I specifically remember most of high school and most of college getting like 4 hours of sleep on the regular, which
Hmm.
is like really not healthy and probably caused some permanent damage somewhere. But I don't really think I was like yeah, I guess there was some stress for sure, but I don't know. I'm just like you don't know anything else at that point, so you don't have anything to compare it to.
Did you have any
Um,
side plans that you were like, oh, well, if music doesn't work out, I'm really good at this thing and I'm going to probably try that?
I know I never really did for some reason, just like only wanted to do music. And I mean, I liked science stuff, but I just never really found a particular thing. And I guess that's the thing is that I think more than anything else, I wasn't necessarily like super smart. I figured out how to take tests well and what you're supposed to do to make school work. And so I think like I was really good at that, but I didn't necessarily have a strong emotional connection to anything that I was learning about. So I think that's why like music was the only thing that I felt like, oh, this is actually something that I really care about. There was never like, but I also love history or I also love physics or something like that. It was just music basically.
Gotcha. And then so going back to when you were younger, in '98, your band Redheaded Stepchild releases Deep, Wide, and Forever. I think is the name. I got it written down here.
Uh-huh.
Are you on that record?
Oh yeah. It's the only record that that band ever did.
Okay, I was just making sure. So who comes to you to say you want to make a record? Did you just guys just decide and save up some money and do it, or did you get funding from someone or a label?
So that was our manager's push basically. And as far as how all that stuff worked, I didn't really know. That would have just been her realm. So yeah, I mean, we just got it. As far as I knew, it was, this is a thing that we should do and go into a studio, make this record, helps to get gigs because we played gigs pretty regularly around Austin, which was a cool experience. Actually playing in real venues, kind of like I want to say at some point we were doing like every other week, or every week maybe playing
Hmm.
gigs.
How many guys were in the band?
Four.
Okay. So that's a great amount of people to actually you can make a little bit of money with a four-person band, especially if you're playing every weekend. Were you making any decent money?
Uh, I don't. I mean, not really. Because we were doing like the Monday night like opening at Antone's for like the real act sort of
Yeah.
thing. So yeah, it wasn't. I don't remember it being very much, but yeah, that's actually a good question. I really have no recollection. I remember that we like saved my first dollar, whatever. My mom saved my first dollar from a gig.
Yeah.
But other than that, I like truly did not remember how much money we made from them. I'm sure it was like, here's $30 or whatever.
And you were happy with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then what was it that led you to go to North Texas?
I went to their combo camp, which
Hmm.
is like their jazz camp they do in the summer. I had some friends that were talking about it in the because I also was in band, like regular band, playing trumpet. So and in the jazz band playing guitar. So I had some friends that talked about it. So I went to that for a couple of years and sort of like a magical experience at that point because in my, at that time I only had two friends that wanted to play jazz for real. Like, there's the jazz band, but most of those people are just showing up and, trying not to get in trouble and then going on to the rest of their day. So I had like two friends that actually wanted to play jazz. And then you go to that and you're staying in the dorms and you're surrounded by all these kids like you from all over the country or possibly even world that want to jam and like know like who all these names of jazz musicians are throughout history. And so you're like sharing records and jamming and all that. So and then you go to learn from the teachers and they're all super nice, which is not exactly how it is when you actually go to school there. But for the combo camp, they're all just like, yeah, yeah, everything's great and positive, and you should definitely come to school here. So yeah, but it was great. I mean, it really this that definitely sealed the deal because it was like, oh, okay, this is the environment. This is the most fun I've ever had doing the thing that I want to do. So that's pretty much it. I mean, there were some thoughts of like I could try to go to Berkeley or the new school or whatever, but like it's so expensive. And North
Yeah.
Texas, especially if you live in state, I mean, if you get, I guess if you get a degree, or sorry, what am I trying to say? A scholarship, then you get in-state tuition. But I already lived in Texas, so I would automatically get in-state tuition. So it's like, a fraction of what it would cost to go to Berkeley or whatever.
Yeah.
Just makes sense to do.
I'll tell you something about the new school because you're saying how they kind of make everything like the camp makes it like everything's great. Come here, come to the school. They kind of, fluff over things.
Yeah.
Um, I'll tell you something about the new school because that's where I just graduated from the new school, and they used to do this. If anyone's listening to this who's going to the new school, just know this: it's great. I'm gonna say it's great, but when they would have people visit, and I'm sure every college does this, when people would come to visit, there would be food in our cafeteria we've never seen before. Like all, and they have all this ridiculous in the cafeteria. It's like the school about preserving energy, and I understand that TVs don't use a ton of energy, but there's like 40 TVs with the menus all around it. Half the time, like one of them's off, one of them, one of them's not working. You would know when people would come to visit, or if there's like they'd bring in high school kids a lot. All these freaking TVs would be on. There would be food there, and you'd be like, "This is amazing food. We never get this." And that's how you know you're like, "Oh, they're trying to sell. Someone's coming in and they're trying to sell them the school."
Wow.
Sorry, new school. I don't mean to break your
Messed up.
secrets.
That's messed up. Yeah, no, I don't think UNT even has enough budget to like fake it for a couple days, but that's amazing. They
Yeah.
would just do, I mean, it kind of makes sense because once you come to school there, then now like it's time to get your butt kicked because otherwise, like, why are you there? So,
Hmm.
but I definitely remember like a specific shift in tone from like the way that the professors treat you when you're just like a kid, just coming to like the summer camp. And then once you say like, I'm coming here next year, then they're like, oh, okay. All right.
Now it's
I'll
time
be,
to work.
I'll be real with you now. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you, when you first got to North Texas, not for the camp, but when you actually went to school, what, how did you, I guess, grade yourself in comparison to everyone else? I felt like I was terrified because everyone was so good. Did you have that same experience, or did you feel that you were like you had prepared enough and that you weren't going to get swept under? Just your initial reaction.
You mean like arriving to jazz
Yeah.
school?
Like when you
Yeah.
first got there, were you thinking like, okay, this is comfortable, or were you going like, oh my God, these people
Yeah.
are, insane?
No, the latter. Yeah, I felt like I was definitely was the bottom of the heap and would have to work so hard to even survive.
Uh-huh.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And who'd you take from when you were in college?
Fred Hamilton was the main guitar professor, and then I also took a lot of lessons with Noel Johnston, who's
Hmm.
a great guitar player who still lives in the area, and I guess he lives in either Dallas or Denton, somewhere in there.
What'd you
Yeah.
do? And then after you graduated, did you plan on, were you like, oh, I'm going to stay in Texas now? Was there any like specific path that you wanted to do that you had planned out right after college, or are you just kind of floating
I
on the
mean,
breeze?
I always sort of thought that I would go to New York, just because it's the thing to do for
Hmm.
jazz, and I pretty much was like for a good chunk of my college years, I was thinking like in the back of my mind, I'm going to be the next Kurt Rosenwinkel. I'm going to like go make really cool modern jazz records and be like a dude. Um, but yeah, that didn't really happen. But like, and I think things started to shift a bit because I kind of remembered that I liked being in rock bands, and that was like a big part of my like actual desire to play music in the first place. So I started to play with some rock bands, or started to run a rock band, and that took up a lot more time and kind of pushed me in a direction of like, you know, opening up myself to different types of playing and different approaches. So I ran that for a bit. And then also like Snarky Puppies, we started to, a lot of the people that were there, part of that band, we started to go down to Dallas and play with like the amazing world of Black music happening in Dallas that like we had literally no connection to at whatsoever 40 minutes north in Denton, which is insane. But like, we are all like obsessed with the RH Factor records. And like, I truly didn't even realize until like, I don't know, somewhere in the middle of my college years that like most of those players were currently living in Dallas and like could potentially be, friends or peers on some level, at least like you could meet them and maybe play with them. So we started to go to some jam sessions, and particularly this keyboard player, RC Williams, who runs the Grits, and then Robert Sput Seawright, who's the drummer, who was in Snarky Puppy and still
Ghost
like,
Note.
and Ghost Note. So those guys in particular, and then Sean Martin also, and Bobby Sparks, they would be super open. So we show up to these jam sessions where like, I feel like in retrospect, we had no business being at, but they're just like, yeah, come on up and play. And then you kind of like learn trial by fire. And I will say there was a difference in the feeling from that in comparison to like the sort of cliche jazz jam where it's like, and the thing people always talk about is vibing. Like when you vibe someone out, it's kind of like I side eye them and you're like, who's this guy think he is? Like,
I'm
and
so
then
happy to hear that that's not just because every time I go, like, I know people from Berkeley and they didn't hear the word vibing until they came to New York. So I'm happy to hear that that's down in Texas because that's like my
totally.
favorite.
Oh, yeah.
Every time you say vibing anywhere, they're like, oh, like, you're hanging out with them. I'm like, no, you're vibing them. It's very different.
Yeah, totally different kind of vibe. Negative, very negative.
I
Yeah.
added vibing to the Urban Dictionary actually, just because I was
Oh, nice.
bored one day and I was like, this needs a genuine description, and so I forgot. But I basically
Well,
explained it as being passive aggressive, usually to people in the entertainment industry.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, the world thanks you for your contribution.
That's the best thing that I think that will be the best thing that I've ever done is add vibing. So
Yeah.
sorry, keep going. So you're
Oh,
playing
yeah.
in Texas with these guys.
Yeah, and on that subject, like I spent several years going almost every week to the Monday night jazz jam at the Elephant Room in Austin,
Mhm.
and like, of course, learned a lot. But that was the experience. Was like, there's always this sort of like, do you deserve to be here? Who do you think you are? And then you play and you suck, and then people are kind of like, either they just like sounds good, but you can tell they don't mean it, or they don't say anything, and like, there's just the energy is weird, but you kind of like push through because it's the way that you learn. And I think a lot of jazz people have this like weird nostalgic mentality for like, oh, back in the day, like that awful movie Whiplash that I wish that I could never have seen. I tried not to see it for so long, and I was like, all right, I guess I'll watch it. But yeah, that's like very much the people that just like, oh yeah, like Charlie Parker didn't get good until he had a whatever thrown at him symbol. I don't know, but it's like,
uh, I don't
I don't know
know who threw it at him.
whether
Do you know?
it was a drummer, I guess.
Well, I know
But
Buddy Rich threw something at someone, but I don't think it was Bird. I'm not sure though.
there's a lot of angry dudes, I guess, in the history of jazz, I suppose. But at the same time, it's like, is that really what happened, or is it that he just like was a great musician and
Yeah.
that event maybe happened? And there's a lot of like rewriting of history, I feel like, and we don't really know what it was like. A lot of musicians also talk about there's like a Charlie Parker downbeat interview, and he's just talking so openly and warmly about all the other musicians that there's, I don't know. Anyway, all of this is to say the energy that I got from that experience was the complete opposite. It was just like, yeah, like come join, hang out, learn these songs, play. and like legitimately want to be a part of your world. And like it was cool. Like that was that was a much better experience.
And
Um,
you said you went there with some of the what would end up being Snarky Puppy guys. Who were the guys
yeah.
that you went to
Well, it
college
already
with?
was. Yeah, because Snarky Puppy started pretty early on. I actually went to the same freshman orientation as Mike League
Oh,
and several other of the band members. Jay Jennings, Clay Pritchard, who was a sax player with us for a long time. Um, but and yeah, lots of people were like so kind of early on. Mike started having just jam sessions in this ballroom that you could rent out for an hour or two, or not rent, you just sort of designate
yeah.
that you're gonna take it for a couple hours. And we would,
What year of college is this for you? Is this freshman year
it
still?
was my freshman year. Yeah.
Okay.
And we would do, and that was common for a lot of people to do, like, especially if you're someone who's kind of a band leader, you have some arrangements or whatever, like get together and play these arrangements, see what it's like. So he started doing that on a sort of a bigger scale, and eventually that became Snarky Puppy. And but for a long time it was just us, like pretty lame, like white kids trying to play jazz combined with other stuff, because we were very into like D'Angelo and RH Factor and that sort of mixture of hip hop and stuff. But then also Mike was pretty interested in world music early on, so that like Brazilian stuff started to be a part of the band pretty early.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, just a lot of like African diaspora styles of like percussion was definitely a big part of it early on. But we were just like hoping and listening, and we didn't really have any actual connections to any of that stuff until we started to go down to these jam sessions. And I don't really remember exactly like whether we started to go to the jam session, or I think there might have been a connection through like some church gigs that we were playing, and we would meet people. So yeah, like the one of the guitar players in the band, Mark Lettieri, he before he was in our band, he was playing around the scene already with a lot of those people. And there's a trumpet player, songwriter, keyboard player named Phil Lassiter,
Of course,
who,
yeah.
yeah,
He used to
he
tour
had,
opening up for you guys, right? At one point.
we've definitely played gigs together. And that's kind of how we met, or at least in my memory, that's how we met Mark. And I played with Phil Lassiter for a bit, and Mike did too. So that started to be a connection there, and starting to go to these jam sessions around the same time. I don't really remember like the exact chronology of that. It's just big
Yeah.
in my brain of them all together.
How do you think at that time the way the band sounded? How do you think it fit in with not? I guess specifically like the college scene, the North Texas scene. Did you think of it as like, oh, we're making this stuff and it sounds totally different than everybody else, or was it just kind of a an amalgamation of stuff of like the other groups that were at the college?
I think in my mind it was just sort of the next step, because hearing them play, and especially like trying, being on the same stage trying to play with musicians of that caliber, it's like like you were saying, like when you first get to college and you're just like, oh, I am the worst person on this stage,
Hmm.
and that's a really good thing. I'm really glad. And so in that situation, it was like I have a degree in jazz, and I've gone through all this stuff, and I'm like, it's like in the 1 o'clock lab band, like according to UNT, I'm like really, really good at jazz. And then go to those situations and just feel like a child. Like I do not know how to play one measure that feels good. I think that was the main thing, was feel, just rhythm and good feeling. Playing a groove just doesn't happen in jazz school.
Yep.
So that was the main thing. But I mean, honestly, like also just harmonically, like, the gospel music world has crazy harmony that is related, but is not at all the same thing as the way that it's taught in jazz academia. So that was a big eye opener for me too, trying to think about trying to figure out how to think about harmony and play with good feel. So yeah, I guess it was, I don't know exactly how to describe that in terms of like the way that you pose the question. But for me, it was just sort of like, okay, this is the real thing. This is the thing that we've been wanting, and it's right here. And these people are willing to play with us. So
Yeah.
going to take advantage of that.
And what year was it when you graduated college?
2006.
Okay, so that's the same year that the only constant came out, I think, right?
I don't know. That's possible. I guess I was thinking it would have been a little bit earlier, but I really don't know. That's
I think
possible.
I can't remember now. Jeez, I should have written that down.
I mean, the internet will know.
Yeah, if if you asked me, I think maybe like when I was in high school, I could have listed probably every detail of a Snarky Puppy album, like with a perfect amount of accuracy. And I think I might be slipping now, so I hope I didn't get that wrong by saying it's
Totally fine.
2006.
You don't need that information.
Hey,
You
it's
can.
fun. It was. Hey, I gotta be honest. Snarky Puppy like was part of the reason that I ended up because like I saw the I think it was the family dinner. Yeah, Family Dinner 2. I saw the premiere in New York City, and it was like kind of I always liked New York, and it was one of those things where I saw the premiere of the movie. Well, not a premiere, but the tour of the movie, and I was
Yeah.
like, it was I kind of associated that and how much I like the band with New York City. And so I think that's a big part of the reason that I was like, man, I got to come to this city because this is where, big stuff happens.
Yeah.
But
That's cool.
yeah, and so when you guys got started on that first record, whenever year it did come out, I'm not sure. Did you think going in like I would prefer to be the only guitarist, or is it just kind of this natural thing of you and Bob playing together?
It was always pretty natural. I don't. I guess we're both on that record. Is that right?
Yeah,
Right.
according to the information I read, it said it was you and Bob were the only guitarists, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. I mean, I have a terrible memory anyway, but yeah, I have a hard time keeping it all straight because at some point, Mike, or at some point, Bob and Moz moved to New York, because they were a couple years older than us, and then shortly after that, Mike did and Justin did. It's just sort of the band kind of gradually moved there. But during the time where Bob moved to New York, but Mike hadn't yet, I was doing more of the Snarky Puppy stuff. But then once Mike moved to New York, he was doing a lot more. Um, but yeah, I think early on during that time, we were both just yeah, we would both just play. It was
Hmm.
always sort of like a just whoever can be there situation. For a very long time, it was just like whoever can show up, let's do it. Then we eventually had to get a little more strict because, adulthood things happen.
Uh-huh. Yeah, when I was talking about Moz, he was saying how, especially like early on in the days when the band was touring, that it was kind of this mix of like certain people would go out to the clubs at night and party after shows, like, have fun. Some people were more like the I'm tired, I want to go home. Where do you fall on that spectrum, or where did you back then, and how has it changed now?
I mean, I've always been I'm tired, I'm going to go home.
I'm the
I mean,
same person.
I mean, yeah, I do like tend to make a decent amount of the hang, but like, yeah, I'm definitely not the one who's up all night. I'm like, all right, this has been good. I'm gonna go now. But I do think like in a way that was a little bit of the like the weird mixture of elements that worked very well to make Snarky Puppy successful was that that we had so many people in the band because it seems like that would be like a real problem for touring, and I'm sure Mike would say it was a real problem for touring. But the plus side of that is that like for years, we were playing gigs, just sleeping on people's couches and like playing in random college bars or whatever, literally anything that we could get, we would say yes to. And in those situations, like you never know who you're going to meet, and it works to your benefit to have this like huge range of personable individuals in the band because maybe some random person doesn't respond to one person in the band, but they love someone else and they have like the greatest night of their life hanging out with that person in the band. And then they remember you like 6 months later when you come through town and you're looking for a place to sleep or a venue. Can you get me in touch with a band that we can join up, a local band we can play with or whatever? Like you make these connections that you don't necessarily see that from the outside, but it's such an important part of growing a band is just making those connections
Do you
from the
remember any
ground.
particularly miserable nights having to sleep in someone's house early on?
I mean, I don't really remember anything being miserable. Like we were young enough to just look at it all as like fun.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, there there was one where someone had like a fox for a pet, and I remember like I was sleeping on a sleeping bag on the ground, and I woke up and like saw like I didn't know that they had it, and I was like, what the? That's a fox. So that was pretty weird. But yeah, no, I mean, like, yeah, I never really remember it being miserable. Although I will say that I did, compared to people like Maz, I definitely didn't go on nearly as many of the tours. Like I was always kind of doing like my rock band on the side. So I would, Bob did more of the touring compared to me. So yeah, maybe they thought it was miserable at some point. It's definitely
Yeah,
possible.
Bob's actually coming on the show a week from today. Actually,
Oh, awesome.
do you have any personal questions you've been aching to ask him but never got the chance?
If I were Mark, I would just go full troll now.
Yeah, uh I forgot where I saw it. It was on like an Instagram live stream, and it was like Becca Stevens, she's been on the show, and I forgot who she was talking to. And I'm like reading the comments, and it's just Mark Lettieri just like making fun of them all brutally in the comments. Like every comment is Mark just going like insane. Some of the funniest shit I've ever seen.
Yeah, yeah, that's his thing.
Yeah, you're not that kind of
I'm,
person.
I'm far too nice. Yeah,
You're you're not the ball buster.
no, definitely not.
Yeah. And so
Ball,
then what?
I'm the ball busty.
Yeah, exactly. I'm kind of that too, except occasionally I have a bad tendency of, people bust my balls minorly, and then my reaction, like my joke in response, sometimes is a little bit too harsh, and I have to back
Oh
off
yeah,
on it.
yeah, I've definitely done that. Yeah, it's like some sort of like, just not being great at social situations, just like go too far, and then everyone's like, "Whoa."
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I
There's
do
some
that.
there's something
Fortunately,
about that, especially with like close groups of guys, that you have to have that moment like once a night where one person says something that's just a little bit too far, and then you kind of back off a little bit. It builds character for the group, I guess.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I,
So
I don't know what that's like in the world of social media these days, because back then we didn't have the ability to just post anything that someone might be thinking in their brain. So a little more room for like, yeah, saying questionable things.
yeah, I try to post as little as possible. Occasionally I'll have something that I think is like remotely funny that I'll be like, I'll post an Instagram story of it, but in general, and then they never are funny. I just think they're funny because it's 1 in the morning and I go, that'd be kind of funny. But I hate that. I can't stand when I go on like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. It's like every 2 seconds it's something, and I'm like, I can't look. It's supposed to be your brain's train of thought. I'm not supposed to be responsible for hearing it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. There's no rules, so everyone's just sort of figuring it out like all the time. It's pretty crazy, the
It's
whole thing.
interesting. But yeah, so then how did it turn from you're in Snarky Puppy, and then I guess probably first records around 2006 at least, and then about a decade later, uh, Forq puts out their second record, and that's your first record that's their first record that you're playing guitar. Who came to you to join the band?
Yeah, Mike just called me. We were in this a store in Houston with my wife and her family, like shopping for Christmas stuff, I think. I
Mm-hmm.
want to say, well, it would have been Hanukkah stuff for them. But yeah, and then Mike was like, "Hey, you want to be in Fork?"
Mm-hmm.
I was like, "You mean Adam Rogers' band? That super group that very specifically contains Adam Rogers?" And he was like, "Yeah, you want to be like with him or instead of him?" "No, instead of him." "Okay, okay. Yeah, I do. Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds cool."
Very easy decision.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, that's kind of how he is, because he's always like juggling a million things. So I'm sure it was just like that had been developing for a while. I know that it was, from my perspective, seeing them as a band, that was my thought. This is a super group containing these people very specifically. But I think that he just didn't want to set aside like a ton of time for touring. And I think he probably would have been down to just make records or whatever. But Henry and Mike very much wanted to like be a real band and go on tour.
Mm-hmm.
So they, at some point decided like this isn't going to work. So yeah, Mike, I guess that was what, I was someone that Mike thought would be a good fit. And I had done a little bit with Henry, recording for Lucy Woodward and New York. I like came up and Henry, I mean, like we kind of had this connection from early days when his band Rudder would play. We would play with Rudder. Snarky Puppy would play on tour with Rudder just a little bit. So we had that connection, although we didn't really know each other very well from that. So we kind of knew each other more from the Lucy Woodward thing. And he saw me in the studio, and I was playing in rock bands, and I think compared to a lot of guitar players, more willing to like make weird sounds. Like I would just like turn my delay pedal up until it would feed back and do some wacky stuff. And I think that he, for him, that's like a aha thing, or, this is someone who's not just going to like play clean jazz guitar.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it ended up being a really good fit, because both Henry and I are super interested in playing different genres and kind of unusual sounds, and that was a shared thing for us in the band.
When you came in, at that time, that was when Mike League was still playing bass, and the kind of the Venn diagram of Forq and Snarky Puppy kind of overlapped. Once you came in, there's like a significant overlap. Were you
Right.
thinking like, how am I going to come in here and make this sound like its own band? Was there like a conscious effort beforehand? You're like, I'm going to play this way, or we're going to do these certain things, so that way it's different and doesn't sound like Snarky Puppy condensed. Was there a lot of thought that went into that?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a thing that you have to think about. And I think, it wasn't too hard because right off the bat, like at that point, I hadn't written anything for Snarky Puppy other than this one song called Fair Play
Mm-hmm.
from way back in the day that we never played live. So it wasn't like really a thing where it's like I've already got this voice as a composer that's in Snarky Puppy. So anything that I wrote would by default be different from Snarky Puppy. So from a composition standpoint, that wasn't really an issue. And then from a playing standpoint, it wasn't really either, because I guess I've always felt like in Snarky Puppy, you get like your moment to shine and do some stuff, but the rest of it is very collaborative. Like anything I'm playing, I'm just constantly listening, especially to keyboards and drums and percussion, and trying to fit what I'm going to do in with them and do cool things and play off of that. That's like, to me, the whole thing with Snarky Puppy is that collaboration and improvisation. So when you're playing with only three other musicians, like that's not even a thing at all. And instead, as the guitar player in that role, I'm basically like taking on the entire role of the horn section and half the keyboards. And, so like I really need to step up and like have a strong voice. So that's a thing that I never really had in Snarky Puppy. So pretty much just the more that I leaned into like stepping out and having a strong voice in the band, the more the band worked and took it even further away from Snarky Puppy, basically. Just a guitar led weird sound band. Doesn't, even though it's also instrumental, improvised, song oriented, groove oriented, there's a lot of ways in which it's obviously like generally the same as Snarky Puppy, but like from a more specific standpoint, in my brain, it never really felt like it was similar at all.
Whose idea
But
was it to release the new EP that's the remixes of the other EP with all these producers on it? Whose idea was that?
yeah, that was Henry's idea. I don't know exactly where it came from. He just sort of mentioned it to me as something that would be really cool, and I never even thought about it before. I've seen, obviously other people do remixes, but never really seen anyone in our sort of general area of music do that kind of thing. So yeah, like instrumental, and some of the remixers also mentioned that they're used to remixing vocal things, and you kind of just take the vocal and pretty much scrap the rest of the stuff and build your own track under it. But obviously for us it's very different, like doing an instrumental remix. And we kind of made I think at first it was kind of like thinking that maybe it would be a dance remix, but then the more we started to think about it, it seemed cool to just include people that had never even done a remix in their life, and this is their first time doing it, and just give them the stems and say, do literally whatever you want. So some of them are like, similar to the original with a different feel or whatever, different arrangement. And some of them are like wildly different, just like they took bits and pieces and created a whole new song. So I think it's cool in a way. It's like remix is kind of being used loosely,
Uh-huh.
but it's, a different way of thinking about how to get more interesting stuff out of things you've already recorded.
Yeah, I loved hearing, because a lot of the original material, especially at certain points, is pretty out. In there's a lot of changing drum grooves and all this, and I was like, listening to it, and then I listened to the remixes, and I was like, I, I have like I don't know how I would do this. Like when they remixed it, because it's really hard when you have so many different options to choose from. It almost makes it more difficult when you have a pop song. Like he said, you take the vocal out. So I was just amazed, and I was impressed because I don't really like remixes that much. Like usually I hear a remix and I'm like, you get so attached to the original material that you kind of can't hear it. But you're right. It was like listening. It was almost like listening to a whole new album on some of the songs, and a lot of them
Yeah.
had a lot of them sounded like the Minecraft soundtrack, which gave me this nostalgic feeling, which I think that might have made me really like the remixes.
Oh, weird. I don't even think I know the Minecraft soundtrack, so now I have to go listen to that and compare.
Chris, if you want to hear an absolute banger of an album, go listen to all of the Minecraft stuff. I think the producer's name is C214. Like I grew up with Minecraft, so
Awesome.
it's like in the back. I can sing every song from all of the updates of Minecraft from memory,
Amazing.
But
I guess
incredible music.
I thought for some reason I thought there wasn't any music at all. Like now that
No,
I
it was very piano heavy. I think when it started there wasn't any, and then it was very piano heavy. Um, and then they started doing like you'd actually I think you would really like it, like weird kind of out synth stuff, like arpeggiated synths mixed with like random, percussion instruments. And it's honestly for a game where you take a bunch of like pixelated blocks and build shit, it's one of the fucking best soundtracks I've honestly ever heard.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, there's definitely, a strong current of video game music in Forks,
Hmm.
especially the most recent album, but the other ones too. So
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah.
What was it? What was the? I'm veering off completely here, but what was it that got you into? Because I know you also create apps. You've created a couple apps. When did that start? Was that something you had always kind of had in the back of your mind that you wanted to do, or did that just kind of come out of nowhere?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking actually when you asked me about any other sort of backup plan, the only thing that I did have a connection with was coding. When I was in high school, I was lucky enough to be able to take I think 2 years of programming. And yeah, I mean, I had been playing video games forever. So there's, basically like as soon as I figured out that like, oh, I can like do this and this and this, and I can make things move around on the screen, then obviously you're going to try to like program a video game. So I would try to get done with my official work as fast as possible so I could spend the rest of the class time working on my like very, very, very crappy video game of just like something trying to move around and like I could barely even get it to move around and jump or whatever. But yeah, so that was kind of always in the back of my mind. And here and there, I would do a little bit of web coding because I think I was a lot earlier than most of my friends at school at like getting my own website. So I did a little bit of that. And then the main thing, though, was I was always writing out diagrams of guitar scales and arpeggios and stuff because I'm very visual, I guess, in that way.
Hmm.
Guitar is very visual. So I didn't like the way that like there's like a vertical way that people write out like chords on guitar. I just never liked that because my teacher always did like a horizontal way that made more sense to my brain. So I would always be writing them out. And then at some point I was like, it would be really cool if instead of writing each of these out, I could just have like a computer program that would let you pick which notes that you wanted to see. So you could just do any scale you want. So I did a web version of that on my website that was done in like JavaScript and whatever, HTML, CSS.
Oh, so that
The
was your
normal,
first programming language?
yeah. And I would just like hack through it. So I would Google forever until I figured out how to do something I needed to do and then copy paste and
Uh-huh.
move stuff around until eventually it worked. And um, yeah, so but it did work. So for a long time that was up on my website and it had that. And then eventually decided it would be cool to make like a iPhone app. I mean, it would be even cooler if it was universal on Android as well, but haven't quite got there yet. But yeah. So anyway, long story short, I hired a developer to help me do that because that is a whole different language, and I just didn't have time to spend to work on that. So I hired her for to kind of like put the main pieces together, and then I would like tweak it once it was there until it was just right. And then there's this other app, the set app for like building set lists. And that was again just sort of because I just wanted it. I just thought it would be cool to have. And I kept looking at all the set list apps that existed, and they either don't work very well or they just look bad. So but sort of like, because what I really wanted was a set list app where you could just like quickly move things up and down. Like you can kind of do it in iTunes, but it's not specifically for sets. Anyway, it just seemed like a better thing that could exist. So I taught myself how to do that one using this language called Swift.
Hmm.
That's like the iOS specific language. Um, but there again, I mean, I just like Googled stuff until I eventually figured out how to make it do what I wanted it to do. And it took like 3 months of almost nonstop work to do that. Which is like not feasible for moving forward and trying to get anything else done in my life. So it's kind of just sat there being not very well updated and not put on Android. But I am talking to someone right now about revamping it and trying to get it on Android. So that's the goal. Can't.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I just, I sort of want to do everything myself, and it is really fun. Coding is really fun. It's just like I
It's got to
can't
hurt
do
your brain after a while, right?
it. It doesn't hurt my brain. It just, I think I turn into a different person. Like I just have zero the interest in music. Like it takes me completely away from music for some reason. So like I can't really do both at the same time. I just have to do all one or all the other. And yeah, it doesn't work for me to drop all of the music things that I'm doing and just turn into a coder.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. So
Have you put any thought into, you ever been like, oh, maybe I want to make a video game in the future?
no, I never really thought about that. That seems way more complicated.
But you were a big video game player though. You still are.
I mean, I was definitely like all the way through like original Nintendo, Super Nintendo, but then once I got beyond that, I didn't do a whole lot. So
Mm.
I don't know if there'd be a whole lot of overlap with our gaming experience. Although I did just recently we got my wife and I got the Switch Lights, so that was a pandemic purchase for sure.
Yeah,
But
I bought a regular Switch during the pandemic. That was like the one big thing that I bought,
we
and
tried to,
honestly,
and
it's
they were
nice.
all sold out
Yeah,
everywhere, every
I
single.
I got really obsessed with it, and I was like, I gotta find a way to get one because my girlfriend and I were at my parents' house, and I was like, I really want to play Mario Kart and Smash and Animal Crossing. That was like what it was, and I
Mhm.
found this website that would notify you when stuff would go up, and it's notified that they're in stock. Basically, they were around, but they were selling out so quickly on the websites that the websites would shut them down, like Amazon would, and then you'd have to go and find like the second they would list it. And I remember just one day it said like they're up right now, and I went on Amazon and I just refreshed it and kept hitting add to cart. And then one time when I refreshed it, it just said in stock, and I did one click purchase and it sent it. I don't know how the hell I did it, but I guess I broke the system.
It's great. Yeah, it's amazing. We really wanted to, and then we are like, well, I guess we'll get the light. But yeah, it's also cool to like have your own personal thing. So
It's
it's
nice.
fun.
What do you play on it?
Yeah, definitely Animal Crossing. Although I haven't
Fuck
played
yeah.
it for a long time. When I go, the next time I log in, my villagers are going to be like so mad at me. They're going to be saying the most passive aggressive, sad, angry things.
I know. I played it for like 4.5 months straight, like just
Hmm.
constant, and then I have not touched it since July of last year. I don't think.
Oh yeah, yeah. When you go back in, they all say like super shady things. Like they're like, "Oh, I haven't seen you so long. I thought you died."
Yeah, I know. I love that. I love that. Like, there's something about it. I think it must be like Japanese humor because I love how randomly dark like Nintendo games are. Randomly,
Yeah,
they'll be like, "Oh, I haven't seen you in a while. Like, I thought I would find you in your house, like dead or something." They'll be like they
right.
allude to really like creepy stuff. I love it. It's the funniest shit.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Stardew Valley. That's another good one.
Of course, yeah. I played it in high school. I got it for my played it on my computer. Like so much Stardew Valley.
Yeah, I never even heard about it until like I don't know 3 months ago. But it's
Yeah,
super fun.
it was you know Steam, like the app,
Yeah,
the game. I don't know,
platform.
distributor, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah,
platform. That it was a Steam only game for a while. You know, the guy who built that did everything, every part of it himself: graphic design, music, coding, everything.
I heard that. That's kind of mind-boggling.
It's the most depressing fact I've ever heard because I'm like, holy shit, I couldn't do that. Jeez. And it's the funny part of it is it looks great, it plays great, and the music is fantastic.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
Polymath.
exactly. Well, here, quick, Chris, quick, before I let you go, let me see. I don't have my glasses on. Ian Aras, I hope I
Oh
said that
yeah.
name. Says, "Hey Chris, long time no see." I want to make sure I get that in before I let you go.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. I know
Hell yeah.
Ian.
Hell yeah, Ian. Thank you for watching. And Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. It's been great.
Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time out. And everyone watching, we'll be back next Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Bob Lanzetti, Mr. Boob
Bomb.
Spaghetti himself. And and then I'll release the schedule for the rest of the shows. I don't know what. I'll put them on Instagram or something. Anyway, if you like the video, like it, subscribe, do all that crap, and I'll see you guys next week.
Wow.